Hello, Dr. Ron Eglin. This is for COP 4834, and this is going to be 10 minutes to create an MVC project to implement a simple form. And pay close attention. I'm going to move through this very, very fast, but show that this is something that is quite doable and quite doable quickly. So I'm actually here in Visual Studio 2015. I'm going to go ahead and start a new project. And hopefully if the form's open very quickly, we'll be able to do this fast. I'm going to create a web, ASP.NET web application here. I'm just going to leave it as web application 2. I'm not really going to change a lot of the defaults that go with this. I'm not going to set source control here because I don't want to mess with the configuration of the source control, but normally I would add the source control. Once I go through that form there, I'm going to get a second one here. I did say I was going to be doing an MVC form here, so MVC is going to be selected. I don't plan on doing any web forms or anything else with this. I'm not going to go ahead. In this case, I'm not doing a host in the cloud with Azure. I am going to use the standard authentication model. I could go to no authentication, but I'm going to go ahead and leave this with the individual user account based authentication here. So I'm going to stay with that. Okay, and I am going to add unit tests to this, even though I'm not going to actually demonstrate any unit tests. So standard MVC, okay, with regular default authentication, without hosting in the cloud. I actually do normally host in the cloud too. So now I say OK, and it's going to go ahead and create this project web application 2. Now, as we're waiting for it to create the web application, what's going on is we're dealing with MVC, Model View Controller Architecture. And really, I look at MVC as model-based development. If you can develop your data model, then a lot of the stuff that you can do in MVC is really going to be automated. But the other two pieces, the controller, which controls how data gets from the model to the output, basically acts as the go-between to make sure that your data model and the views work together. Something's got to be doing all the controlling. And then the view, which is essentially what does the user see. So now, this is the default application. Notice I haven't written any code yet for this. And I'm about 2 minutes in. I haven't written any code. Microsoft has done all the heavy lifting here. So, and it gives me this beautiful default application, which, by the way, I can build and run. If I go ahead and run this in Firefox, if I click Firefox, which is what I'm using as my default browser, it's going to go ahead and start doing a build, and I should get the actual application over here operating inside of Firefox, which is the browser that I've got running right here. I'm also going to be using Entity Framework for this because I'm going to try not to be messing with the database itself. So there it is. I've actually got a home page up and running. I can go ahead and stop. Now, model-based development means I'm going to make the model. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm simply going to make a form that's going to have these fields in it: name, address, phone, and email. Very, very simple stuff. So this is going to be input form with those 4 elements in it. So how do I do this? I go to models. A model is a class. That's all it is a class. Don't really need to worry about anything other than the fact that it's a class. So I'm going to create this class underneath models, and I'm going to call it, okay, name or user data entry form. Okay, that's it. Or I just call it user data entry. I'll just be even simpler than that. So it's going to create a model called user data entry. I do want to use annotations. I want to annotate the properties, but let me first make the properties here. This is going to be relatively straightforward. I can use the prop, which is prop tab. Lets me very easily default this. I had these properties: name, okay, then prop tab. I'm going to make another next one, address. Okay, next. And see this, you can, and I can actually type it out too, but I can use the, these little shortcuts are kind of nice. So far, they're all strings, phone, and the last one being email. Okay, prop, tab, string, and they were all strings. I could have had an int in here, email. Now, because I'm using Entity Framework, and this is important, I can go ahead and do this, run through an error and get the error. I also know that I'm going to need something that's going to be able to serve as an ID. This is going to actually, an entity framework, it's going to make a database table. And the database table needs to know what the key is. So I'm going to go ahead and make an integer ID, which I'm going to set as the key to this. So same as all the other properties, it's going to look exactly the same. Now, to do this, I actually need, I would need to annotate these properties. Now, properties are just that. They're class properties. Annotations to the properties, which I call attributes, property attributes, are this nice thing that tells what these properties actually mean. It's basically meta information about the properties. Now, to do it, I actually have to have the correct using. Well, I love to cut and paste, so I'm just going to go over to one of these other models that we have here, and I'm going to go ahead and get the systems, the data annotations, the using for the data annotations, copy it, bring it back over here, and stick it in here so that I can now do data annotations. And here's the data annotations I'm going to do. The ID is the key. I'm going to annotate that as the key. That's going to make the system know that that is my key. Name is going to be required. Okay, it's the same as me saying in the database that it can't be null. And you know what? I'm going to make, in this case, we'll leave these other ones not required, but I'm going to go ahead and make email required. And I've got other annotations that I can do here, like, for example, the phone annotation. I could actually say, let's make this a phone number, okay, phone. And I can then have other things that I do, like set what's the error message if it's entered correctly. So error message equals, and then in quotes put, you entered it wrong. Okay, now there's more to that, but I'm just demonstrating some of these property annotations that I have here. So these things actually annotate these properties and will be used by the system to actually make the thing work. Now, to actually make this form. So if I've got this done, the next step I've actually got, right now this is my database that isn't really hooking to, so I'm going to go ahead and I need to snag a connection string. I need to connect to a database is what I need to do. So I need to do a connection string. So if I go over here to the Server Explorer here, and I got, let's see, there's dead connections. I need to create a new connection here. Let's go ahead and add a connection. And I have a 030609 England. That should give me a database that I have that's available through Windows Authentication. I didn't want to connect to any of the default database files because I actually had that turned off right now. But and hopefully this database is I entered it correctly. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time. I was trying to get this done in actually 10 minutes. But you know what? I think I did. So I'm going to go to pause and put in the correct number. And now that I've entered the correct A30609/Eklund, not A03, I now have connection to the database. I actually went ahead of time into SQL Server to this database and created a database inside the server called Web Application 2 because I didn't want to. I had a place where I really wanted to put the database tables. So if I go down here, I'll actually see Web Application 2 database in this server. Okay, so that is now an actual live connection. Thing is that I need to use that live connection in this application, and I don't want to use local DB. So what I do need to do here is go to the properties. I need to find the connection string associated with that, which is down here in the properties. I'm going to put properties up here so you can kind of see it a little bit wider. The connection string is right here. Okay, I'm going to highlight the entire connection string, and now I'm going to do a little bit of a trick here. Okay, I'm going to close the properties. I'm going to go over here to the web.config and just tell it, hey, you know what? I want you to use this database, not the one that is the file that it would have made by default if I had actually enabled it to do that. So I'm going to take the old one out and put the new one in. So I've changed out the database that it's using. All right, so far so good. I can save off the web.config. So what I did is I created a database in one of my database systems to hold this. I haven't created any tables. I haven't done anything else other than that. And then I connected to that database, pulled the string, and said, use this database, not the one you were going to use. Okay, that way I'm using my database. Okay, that's all I did. Now, I've created this model. The model is done. Okay, I now need to make the other stuff. It's MVC, Model View Controller. Well, you know what? I've got Entity Framework installed here. I'm going to go ahead and just say, you know what? Let's let Microsoft do all the work here. So I'm going to say Controller. I'm going to add a controller, and I'm going to do MVC Controller 5 with views using Entity Framework. Entity Framework actually makes all the tables for me. I hit Add, and it's going to give me another dialog box that says, oh, you know what? What are you going to make the controller for? Well, I'm going to make the controller for this form that I'm making here, which is called User Data Entry. So I go over here, User Data Entry. There it is. Whoops, wrong one. User Data Entry. That's a model. I need the data. I need to use the data context class. I'm just going to use the one that's already there, and I'm going to say, hey, look, I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to leave the rest of it by default, and I'm going to click on Add, and it's going to go ahead and it should. Okay, so it should go ahead and get started. But you know what? It said, you know what? There was an error getting the type. Web application to models.user data entry. Try rebuilding the project. That is expected. Why? Well, the reason is that it doesn't build the stuff off of the code. It builds the stuff off of the compiled version of code. So I have to build first. So I go over here, build. I hit build solution. So when you get an error message, don't panic. They're usually simple things. It says use the build first. Okay, I now know that I need to build the project with the class that I just made before I can make the controller. Okay, simple stuff. Okay, build is started, build is succeeded, all done now. Go back to the same thing again, say add controller. Okay, I'm now adding the controller, MVC5, using Entity Framework. Remember, Entity Framework is going to make the tables for me. Okay, and I'm going to show you that. I'm going to go back down here, find my model class, user data entry. Context class is now this one here. I hit add. Okay, now it's building the scaffolding. This is going to give you some default stuff that you can actually go in and modify the code. And there are some things. Suppose you're going to know you're going to be adding stuff to this class. You're going to add new properties. There are some things you need to do because you've now kind of set this thing in stone. But hey, Entity Framework does deal with all that. Okay, now, controller is now made. I've got a user data entries. I got one for that, a controller. If I come down here into my views, I'll notice that I've actually got a view that goes with this whole thing. So I should be able to run this. And now it's running. I'm going to go back over here. It should pull. There it goes. It's popping up in here. And now here's the cool thing. This is basically mapping each of the URLs, and so I should be able to now go in here, and if I look over at my views, I should be able to, well, actually I just need another name, user data entry / user data entry. I think that's what I called it. Hit enter. Oops, wrong one. I didn't do it right. That's okay. I can come back over here and look at Microsoft being really smart about understanding plurals. User data entries. D. I did it with a Y. It decided that the plural was going to be IES. And now it's actually going to go ahead and pull up the form where I've got user data entries. That's the stuff I just made. Name, address, phone, email. Hey, there they are. Okay. I can create a new. Okay, so my name can now be entered. Oh, good. That's nice. I'm going to go ahead and put, oh, good. It's picked it up. Hopefully it'll pick this up. There it is. There's my phone and my email. There it is. And now I say create, and it actually created it and put it in the database. One last thing I'm going to show you. Okay, so it made that. It did all that work. Okay. Now the code for all this is there. Okay, we're going to talk about that code. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it. We're not going to talk about that code a whole lot here, but we're going to talk about that code in other lectures. But if I look over here, I've got a controller, user data entries, and now I know if you use something that actually ends in a Y, it does know to do IES. Okay, there's the code that goes with the controller. You can read through that. At some point, you will understand what all that code does because we're going to go through it. I'm going to look at the view here, user data entries, and notice I've got a bunch of files here. And if you're familiar with good old Razor syntax, which is all these little @ signs here, where it does a whole bunch of stuff, you'll be able to figure this out. It's not that hard. We're going to go ahead and also go through how all this works, because you also want to be able to make modifications to the view. Okay, the CS HTML is actually literally HTML with C# embedded into it with these symbols. And there's a specific syntax that goes with that. Really cool stuff. Notice I didn't finish it in 10 minutes. I'm sorry, I did it in 16. But as one last thing I'm going to show you here, I will go ahead and I shouldn't have. I'm going to bring up SQL Server Management Studio, okay, which is going to take just a second here. And I know I'm moving through this really rapidly, but at the same time, I know you get impatient if you can't see anything. So now I'm going to go down here to Web Application 2. I'm going to go to Tables. I'm going to notice that I've actually got some tables over here, and I've got one called User Data Entries. And if I look at that table itself, and I look at what columns it's got, hey, I didn't make the table. I made the database to put the stuff in. Look, there it is. ID, primary key, int, not null, name, varchar, max, okay, with not null. The other ones being nullable. All that stuff that I said over here in when I made that model. And remember, that's the only code I wrote, was that. I only made the model. Okay, let's go ahead and stop it here. Everything else, I use the defaults, and that's all the code that I actually wrote to give me this full-scale application. Now, of course, you're going to have to write more code than that as you get into high-level applications, but just wanted to take you through the fact that this is relatively straightforward to do. Thank you very much. Signing out, and have good coding.